Welcome everyone. In the previous episode, when I was showing the largest growing African violet in my collection, I showed these three plants of the same hybrid, a large standard called Opera's Juliet. And I promised to tell you why is it that the largest plant is growing so large, and it was just forming the flower buds, which now we can see beginning to open, whereas the smaller plants, and I have two of them, had already started blooming last week, but they grow much smaller size. There are several factors that influence the plant's growth rate, and in this video let's take a look at each of them. And in particular, we will be taking a look at the growing environment, including light, temperature, and humidity in the growing environment. Then we'll take a look at the potting mix, watering method, and finally we'll take a look at the pot size in which the plant grows. Let's start with the plant's growing environment first. The larger plant is growing in natural light only, and this is a north-facing window, so it doesn't get direct sunlight throughout the day, but it does get some of the light from the east-facing window here throughout the day, so I think it gets sufficient natural light. The temperature here is, the highest is 77 Fahrenheit, and now we are at 73 Fahrenheit today. And the humidity is between 50 and 52% throughout the day. Now here next to it, I just wanted to show you, this is Lion's Magic Charms, and it's a sport. I grew it from a leaf that I got from Linden Line from the native greenhouse, and I do have a true blooming plant, and this one just opened up and I wanted to show it to you since I'm filming this window here, so it's very interesting. I still love it. The true blooming variety blooms with pink and blue fantasy, and this one is just blue color. The two smaller plants are growing on the plant stand, also at the north-facing window, but this plant stand has some LED lights. These are regular LED shop lights with 5000 K light temperature. And the temperature in the growing environment here is a little higher. It ranges between 72 and 79 Fahrenheit, and the humidity fluctuates from 44% to 55%. So here they are, the two smaller Opera Juliets, and the neighbor here is a Seningia that I wanted to show you. It's called Issa's Glamour, and it just started blooming for me. I got it last year from Violet Barn. And the meowing creature here is the cat, the prima donna of the house, having her snacks, and she yells at me all the time, or sometimes when I don't give her snacks. And this is the Streptocarpus vat mandarinka, also very pretty. It translates to a small tangerine, mandarinka, by Tatiana Valkova. So if we compare the temperature and the humidity in which these plants grow, they're about the same. The difference between the light settings is that this particular plant only gets the natural light from the north-facing window, and these two smaller plants are getting, in addition to the same north-facing window light, natural light, they also get the artificial LED supplemental light, about 9 to 10 hours a day at 5000 Kelvin light temperature. And yet they're still growing smaller. So there must be something else that makes them grow smaller and the larger plant grow larger. The next factor in the plant's growth, the potting mix. Now, these two plants, the smaller ones, are growing in a mix of Promix BX and Perlite. Here we have Promix BX, mostly peat moss based with biofungicide and mycorrhizae. The larger plant is growing in a commercially produced potting mix. It's produced by Fox Farm and it's called Ocean Forest. And in addition to peat moss and other main ingredients, it contains earthworm castings and bud guano. And these ingredients are the ones that give extra nutrients to the African violets and make them grow larger. Each of these plants is receiving the same fertilizer. Right now I'm using Dynagrow Orchid Pro with 7:8:6 NPK ratio at about 1/4 teaspoon per gallon of water. The difference in their fertilizing routine brings about the next contributing factor that is very important in considering the plant's grow rate. And that has to do with the watering method. So here we see that the two smaller plants are wick watered and the larger plant is growing without the wick. And I use top watering method for this particular plant. So I don't water it every day. I only water it when the soil or the potting mix becomes dry to the touch on the top here of the surface. And the two smaller plants, they're always receiving the water with fertilizer. And yet still, they're growing much smaller than the larger plant. And finally, let's take a look at the pot size in which each of these plants grow. The smaller ones grow in a 2.5-inch diameter pot, and the larger one grows in a 3.5 diameter pot, and here it's about also 3.5-inch tall, and this one, the small one, is about 2.25-inch tall. So the smaller plants grow in a much smaller size pot than the larger one. And that is where I think the secret lies, because in order to bloom, the African violets like to be slightly root bound. Root bound means that the plant has completely taken up the space within the pot that contains it, forming a mass of roots that occupies almost all of the space inside of the pot. And we can see here that the 3.5-inch pot can hold much larger volume of the potting mix, and therefore it provides more space for the plant's roots to grow, taking longer for the plant roots to fill up the entire pot. And the smaller pot has much less volume, and therefore the roots become root bound, or the plant becomes root bound much faster. And as you can see here, the roots start growing out of the pot into the wick, into the wicking liquid. So that's why the smaller plants started blooming much faster than the larger plant. The larger plant just recently opened up its first blooms. And if we take a closer look at the bottom of the pot, we can see that indeed the roots are getting out of the bottom of the pot here. So we can tell that this plant has also reached the point of being a root-bound plant. And that's why it started blooming. What happens if we just allow the plant to be root-bound and do nothing about it? And here you can see a good example of it. So now these two plants are now extremely root bound because they have a lot of roots growing outside of the pot. The roots sometimes form a spiral on the bottom before they go into the wicking liquid, or if they're not wick watered, they just keep growing in a spiral on the bottom of the pot. And they get less and less nutrients from the potting mix because of the small amount of it in the smaller pot. And as a result, they get the symptoms of stunted growth. And these two smaller plants are at the point when they need to be repotted into a fresh potting soil so they can start getting more nutrients. The symptoms of the stunted growth include smaller leaf size. So here we see that the leaves, the central leaves, can get smaller. And here we can compare the central leaves on the larger plant. So there's a big difference right there. And also the symptoms can include smaller flower buds, and sometimes when the flower buds open, their flowers are smaller in size and they lack color pigment. They become very pale, which is not the case still here with these smaller Opera Juliets. We can see that the pigment is quite strong in the younger buds that just recently opened. So it's still a good chance that they will start growing larger when repotted. And I will show you two other plants where I didn't repot them in time and they continued to be in root bound, and the symptoms now look much worse. Here is the first plant called Emerald Pink. It's a semi-miniature that blooms very nicely with some peachy pink with some green pansy-shaped blooms. And here we can see the nutrient deficiency in the center of the crown, where the leaves become much smaller in size and the flower buds that come out also are much smaller. And if we take a look at the plant's root system here, we can see that the plant has become root bound long time ago and it's way overdue for repotting. In addition to the smaller leaves and smaller flower buds, we can see that the bottom leaves have become translucent, and it means that they are just dying out and not getting enough nutrition from the old potting mix. So I will be repotting this one, or maybe even propagating it anew from a leaf. Sometimes when you catch it early, like with those smaller Opera Juliets, you can still repot it and the plant will bounce back. And in this case, I think I have gone too far. I have waited for too long, and therefore I'll just be regrowing this plant anew from a leaf. And here are two different plants of Anne, a vintage by Betty Bryant. And I wanted to show them to you so you could compare that this plant, that's the way it normally grows, and it is root bound because we can see some roots on the bottom because it's in a smaller pot and it recently started blooming. And this one will be repotted very, very soon so that it keeps on growing healthy. And next to it is an older plant. It's still growing and the center still looks like it's growing fine, but you can see that the leaves are becoming deformed, the flower buds and the bloom stalks are becoming very short if you compare it to the healthy plant on the left. And the best way to tell is just look at these roots here. Way, way, way overdue for repotting. So I will be repotting this one soon as well. When I repot them, I will not be increasing the size of the pot by much. I will probably go about ½ inch to an inch larger, because one thing to keep in mind when repotting African violets is the 1/3 rule, meaning that the diameter of the new pot should not exceed 1/3 of the size of the crown, the diameter of the crown. So to sum it up, Why these plants of the same variety are so different in size and also in their blooming rate is because of the different potting mix that is used to grow them and also the different pot size. The other factors are important too. The watering method, the light, the temperature, the humidity, and once the plant is happy with all of the growing conditions, it will grow and bloom nicely for you. I hope you found this video helpful. Have a great day and subscribe to stay tuned to my future videos.